The Human Chair, by Edogawa Ranpo. Yoshiko's routine was to see her husband off to work each morning. It was always past 10 o'clock, and then, finally feeling like herself again, she would shut herself away in the Western-style study they shared in their mansion. There, she was currently working on a long story for the summer special edition of K magazine. As a beautiful, refined writer, she had recently become so famous that she almost eclipsed her husband, a foreign ministry clerk. Countless letters from unknown admirers arrived at her home every day. This morning, too, after sitting down at her desk in the study, she had to look through these letters from strangers before starting her work. As usual, they were all utterly boring, but out of feminine kindness, she made a point of reading every letter addressed to her, no matter how trivial. After finishing 2 sealed letters and a postcard, starting with the simplest, a bulky envelope remained, seemingly containing a manuscript. She hadn't received any prior notice, but it wasn't unusual for someone to send a manuscript out of the blue. They were often long and tedious, but she decided to at least look at the title. She opened the envelope and took out the bundle of papers inside. As she'd expected, it was a bound manuscript. But strangely, there was no title, no signature. It began abruptly with the salutation, "Madam." Puzzled, she wondered if it was a letter after all. Casually glancing over the first few lines, she sensed something unusual, something oddly disturbing. Her innate curiosity propelled her to read on. "Madam, please forgive the multiple offenses I commit by sending you, a woman I do not know, this impertinent letter. That I know these words will surely startle you, but I am about to confess the strange sins I have committed, sins unlike any other in the world. For several months, I have completely vanished from human society and lived a truly devilish existence. Of course, not a soul in the wide world knows of my deeds. If things had gone differently, I might never have returned to the human world. However, a strange change has recently come over me. I feel an irresistible urge to confess the story of my ill-fated life. These words may raise suspicions in your mind, but please read this letter to the end. Then you will understand why I feel this way, and why I must have you, of all people, hear this confession. Now, where should I begin? The facts are so extraordinary, so far removed from human experience, that this method of communication, a letter used in the human world, feels strangely awkward, and I find my pen faltering. But there's no point in hesitating. I will simply begin at the beginning and write in chronological order that I was born with an exceptionally ugly face. Please keep this firmly in mind. Otherwise, if you were to grant my impertinent request and meet me, the sight of my face, already ugly, now rendered even more repulsive by months of unhealthy living, would be unbearable for me without you being forewarned what a cursed fate I was born with. Despite my hideous appearance, I secretly harbored an intensely passionate heart. Forgetting the reality of my monstrous face and my extreme poverty, a mere craftsman that I was, I yearned for unattainable, sweet, luxurious, and varied dreams. If I had been born into a wealthier family, I might have been able to distract myself from the misery of my ugliness by indulging in various pleasures through the power of money. Or if I had been blessed with more artistic talent, I might have been able to forget the dreariness of this world through beautiful poetry, for instance. But unfortunately, I was denied any such gifts. I was destined to be the pathetic son of a furniture craftsman, eking out a meager living by the trade I inherited from my father. My specialty was making various chairs. My chairs were known to satisfy even the most demanding clients, so the company I worked for favored me, giving me only high-quality work. Such high-quality pieces often involved intricate carvings on the backs and armrests, and subtle preferences regarding the cushions, dimensions, and other details, requiring a level of painstaking effort that laymen can scarcely imagine. However, the greater the effort, the greater the pleasure upon completion. It may sound presumptuous, but I believe this feeling is comparable to the joy an artist feels upon completing a masterpiece. Whenever I finished a chair, I would first sit in it myself to test its comfort. And in those moments, amidst the tedium of my craftsman's life, I felt an indescribable sense of pride. I would imagine who might sit in this chair, some noble person, perhaps, or a beautiful woman. Since they ordered such a fine chair, their residence must have a luxurious room befitting it. Surely, famous paintings would adorn the walls, and a magnificent jeweled chandelier would hang from the ceiling. The floor would be covered with expensive carpets. And on the table before the chair, Dazzling western flowers would bloom, emitting a sweet fragrance. Lost in such fantasies, I felt as if I had become the master of that grand room, and for a brief moment, I experienced an indescribable joy. Futile fantasies would grow unchecked. In my dream world, I, the poor, ugly craftsman, would transform into a noble gentleman, sitting in the magnificent chair I had made. And beside me, the beautiful woman who always appeared in my dreams would smile sweetly, listening intently to my words. And not only that, in my delusion, I would hold her hand and whisper sweet nothings of love. But invariably, this fleeting, violet dream of mine would be shattered by the boisterous chatter of neighborhood women or the hysterical cries of a sick child nearby, and the ugly reality would once again reveal its gray corpse. Returning to reality, I would find myself there, pathetic and ugly, bearing no resemblance to the gentleman of my dreams. And that beautiful woman who had just smiled at me, where could such a creature exist? Even the dirty nursemaid playing in the dust nearby wouldn't give me a second glance. Only the chair I had made remained, a vestige of my dream. But even that chair would eventually be carried away to some unknown place, a world completely separate from ours. Each time I finished a chair, I would be overcome by an indescribable sense of emptiness. This unpleasant feeling, impossible to describe, became increasingly unbearable as time went on. I'd rather die than continue living like a maggot, I would seriously think. While working in the workshop, tapping my chisel, hammering nails, or mixing pungent paints, I would persistently dwell on this thought. But wait, if I'm resolved to die, isn't there another way? For instance. And so my thoughts gradually turned towards a terrifying direction. Around that time, I was commissioned to make a large, leather armchair, a type I had never attempted before. This chair was intended for a hotel in the same city of Y, run by a foreigner. Ordinarily, it would have been imported from his home country, but the company I worked for had campaigned hard, arguing that Japan also had chairmakers no less skilled than those abroad, and finally secured the order. Therefore, I devoted myself to its creation, forgetting sleep and food. I truly poured my soul into it, working with feverish intensity. When I looked at the finished chair, I felt a satisfaction I had never known before. It was a masterpiece, even in my own eyes, so splendid that I couldn't help but admire it. As was my habit, I carried one of the 4 chairs out to the sunny wooden floor and sat down comfortably. What exquisite comfort! The perfect resilience of the cushions, neither too hard nor too soft, the feel of the undyed grey leather, intentionally left uncollared, the ample back supporting my spine at just the right angle, the gently curved, plump armrests, all these elements were in perfect harmony, embodying the very word comfort. I sank deeply into the chair, caressing the rounded armrests, lost in a blissful reverie. And then, as was my wont, an endless stream of fantasies, as colorful as a rainbow, began to well up within me. Were they hallucinations? The images in my mind appeared so vividly before my eyes that I began to fear I was losing my mind. As I sat there, a brilliant idea suddenly came to me. Perhaps this is what is meant by the devil's whisper. It was a bizarre and eerie notion, like something out of a dream. But its eeriness held a strange allure that tempted me. At first, it was a simple desire. I didn't want to part with the beautiful chair I had crafted with such care. If possible, I wanted to go with it, wherever it went. As I drifted on the wings of fantasy, this desire somehow became intertwined with a terrifying thought that had been fermenting in my mind. And then, oh, what madness! I decided to put this bizarre fantasy into action. I quickly dismantled the armchair, the one I considered the best of the 4, and rebuilt it to suit my strange plan. It was a very large armchair, its seat upholstered with leather down to the floor, and its back and armrests exceptionally thick. Inside these, there were large, interconnected hollow spaces, big enough to conceal a person without any outward sign. Of course, there was a sturdy wooden frame and numerous springs, but I modified them so that if someone knelt in the seat, inserted their head and torso into the back, and assumed the shape of the chair, they could fit inside. Such modifications were child's play for me, and I finished them skillfully and efficiently. For instance, I created tiny, invisible slits in the leather for breathing and hearing outside noises. I installed a small shelf inside the back, right next to where the head would be, for storing things. I stocked it with a water bottle and hardtack. I also included a large rubber bag for a certain purpose. I devised various other features to ensure that, provided with food, a person could remain hidden inside for 2 or 3 days without discomfort. In essence, the chair had become a room for one. Stripped to my shirt, I opened the trapdoor I had installed in the bottom and slipped inside the chair. It was a truly bizarre sensation. Dark, stuffy, it felt like crawling into a grave. And in a way, it was a grave. The moment I entered the chair, I vanished from the human world as if I had donned an invisibility cloak. Soon, a messenger from the company arrived with a large cart to pick up the 4 armchairs. My apprentice, I lived with only him, greeted the messenger, completely unaware of my presence. As they loaded the chairs onto the cart, one of the porters grunted, "This one's awfully heavy." I flinched inside the chair, but since armchairs are inherently heavy, no suspicion was aroused. Soon, the jolting of the cart began to transmit a strange sensation to my body that I was extremely anxious, but in the end, everything went smoothly, and by that afternoon, the armchair I was hiding in was securely placed in a room at the hotel. I later learned that it wasn't a private room, but a lounge or a similar common area where people frequently came and went to meet others, read newspapers, or smoked. As you've probably guessed by now, my primary objective in this bizarre undertaking was to slip out of the chair when no one was around, roam the hotel, and steal. Who would ever imagine that a person could be hidden inside a chair? I could move freely from room to room, like a shadow. And when people started stirring, I could retreat to my hiding place inside the chair, hold my breath, and watch their foolish searches. You are familiar with a type of crab called the hermit crab, found along the seashore, aren't you? It resembles a large spider and struts around as if it owns the place when no one is looking, but at the slightest sound of footsteps, it scurries into its shell with incredible speed. Then it peeks its creepy, hairy front legs out of the shell to observe the enemy's movements. I was just like that hermit crab. Instead of a shell, I had a chair for my hiding place, and instead of the seashore, I roamed the hotel as if I owned it. Now, this outlandish plan of mine, precisely because it was so outlandish, succeeded brilliantly, taking everyone by surprise. By the 3rd day at the hotel, I had already pulled off a substantial job. The thrilling excitement of actually committing the theft, the indescribable joy of success, and the amusement of watching people frantically searching right under my nose, what a strange and captivating charm these experiences held for me, but unfortunately, I don't have time to elaborate on them now. I discovered a pleasure far greater, 10 or 20 times more exhilarating than mere theft. And confessing about that is the true purpose of this letter. Let me return to the story, to the moment my chair was placed in the hotel lounge. After the chair arrived, the hotel staff checked its comfort, but then the room fell silent. Presumably, it was empty. But it was far too frightening to emerge from the chair immediately after arrival. I strained every nerve to catch the slightest sound, waiting in the darkness inside the chair for what felt like an eternity, though it may have been just my perception. After a while, I heard heavy footsteps, probably from the hallway. As they approached within a few yards, the thick carpet muffled the sound until it was almost inaudible. But soon I heard a man's rough breathing, and in a flash, a large, presumably Western body landed heavily on my lap, bouncing 2 or 3 times on the cushions. My thighs and his firm, substantial buttocks were separated only by thin leather, close enough to feel the warmth. His broad shoulders rested against my chest, and his heavy hands overlapped mine through the leather. He was smoking a cigar, and the masculine, rich aroma wafted through the gaps in the leather. Madam, imagine yourself in my position for a moment. What a strange and extraordinary scene it must have been. I cowered in the darkness inside the chair, terrified, cold sweat dripping from my armpits. My mind went blank, and I simply sat there, dazed. Starting with that man, various people sat on my lap throughout the day. And none of them realized that what they believed to be soft cushions were, in fact, the living, breathing thighs of a man. Me. The dark, cramped world inside the leather upholstery, what a strange and alluring realm it were. There, human beings felt entirely different from the humans one sees in the everyday world. They were nothing more than voices, breaths, footsteps, the rustle of clothing, and a few rounded, resilient masses of flesh. I could identify each one by their touch, rather than their appearance. Some were plump and flabby, feeling like rotten fish. Others, in stark contrast, were bony and thin, like skeletons. The curve of their spines, the set of their shoulder blades, the length of their arms, the thickness of their thighs, even the length of their coccyx, considering all these points, I could distinguish between even the most similar physiques. Humans, it turns out, can be perfectly identified not only by their faces or fingerprints, but also by the feel of their entire bodies. The same applied to the opposite sex. In ordinary circumstances, people are judged primarily by their facial features, but in the world within the chair, such considerations were irrelevant. There were only naked bodies, voices, and scents. Madam, please do not be offended by my frankness, but I developed a strong affection for the body of a certain woman. She was the first woman to sit in my chair. Judging by her voice, she was a young foreign girl. The room was empty at the time. She seemed to be in high spirits, humming a strange tune and entering with a dancing gait. And then, as soon as she reached the armchair where I was hiding, she suddenly threw her full, yet supple, body onto me. And then, for some reason, she burst into laughter, her limbs flailing as she bounced like a fish in a net. For nearly half an hour, she remained on my lap, occasionally singing and wriggling her heavy body as if in time with the melody. This was a truly unexpected and earth-shattering event for me. I, who had always regarded women as sacred, or rather, as frightening beings, whom I hesitated even to look in the face, was now in the same room, in the same chair, no, even closer than that. Intimately close to a foreign girl I had never met, separated only by a thin layer of leather, close enough to feel the warmth of her skin. And yet, she showed no sign of unease, entrusting her entire weight to me, her posture unrestrained by the absence of onlookers. I could pretend to embrace her within the chair. I could kiss her full neck from behind the leather. I was free to do anything I pleased. After this astonishing discovery, I became obsessed with this world of tactile sensations, relegating my initial objective of theft to a secondary concern. I thought to myself, this world within the chair, is my true home. A timid, ugly man like myself is always self-conscious in the bright world of light, destined to live a shameful, miserable life. But once I changed my world, enduring the cramped discomfort within the chair, I could be close to beautiful women I wouldn't dare speak to, let alone approach, in the bright world, and hear their voices, feel their touch, love within the chair. How strangely intoxicating and alluring it was, a feeling impossible to understand unless one has experienced it firsthand. It was a love of touch, of sound, and of a faint hint of scent. A love of the world of darkness. It was not of this world. Was this not the lust of the devil's realm? When one thinks about it, what strange and terrifying things must be happening in the hidden corners of this world, beyond our imagination, of course. My original plan was to leave the hotel as soon as I achieved my objective of stealing, but captivated by this extraordinary pleasure, I not only stayed but made the chair my permanent residence. I took extreme care during my nightly excursions, making no sound and avoiding being seen, so there was naturally no danger. Still, it was astonishing that I managed to live inside the chair for several months without being discovered. Being cooped up in the chair almost 24/7, with my arms bent and knees folded, my entire body became numb. I could no longer stand up straight, and eventually, I had to crawl like a cripple to and from the kitchen and bathroom. What a madman I was! I couldn't bear to abandon this world of strange sensations, even at the cost of such suffering. Some guests stayed at the hotel for a month or two, treating it like their home. But hotels, by their nature, have a constant flow of guests coming and going. Consequently, my strange love affairs inevitably changed partners with time. And the memories of those numerous, mysterious lovers are etched in my mind not by their faces, but primarily by the shape of their bodies. Some had lean, taut bodies like colts, others had sensual, sinuous bodies like snakes, some had plump, fleshy bodies full of fat and resilience like rubber balls, and yet others had strong, well-rounded bodies like Greek sculptures. Each woman's body had its own unique characteristics and allure. As I moved from one woman to another, I also had other strange experiences. One such experience occurred when the ambassador of a major European power, I learned this from the gossip of the Japanese bellboys, rested his imposing frame on my lap. He was even more renowned as a world-famous poet than as a politician, so I felt a thrill of pride at having known the touch of this great man's skin. He conversed with several of his countrymen for about 10 minutes while sitting on me, and then departed. Of course, I couldn't understand a word they said, but the ticklish sensation of his body, warmer than usual, moving with each gesture, gave me an indescribable thrill. At that moment, a strange thought crossed my mind. What would happen if I were to thrust a sharp knife through the leather, aiming for his heart. Surely, it would be a fatal blow, preventing him from ever rising again. His home country, not to mention the Japanese political world, would be thrown into an uproar. The newspapers would be filled with impassioned articles. It would greatly affect diplomatic relations between Japan and his country, and from an artistic standpoint, his death would be a great loss to the world. The thought that such a momentous event could be easily brought about by my own hand filled me with a strange sense of power. Another experience was when a famous dancer from a certain country visited Japan and happened to stay at the hotel. She sat in my chair only once, but she made a similar impression on me as the ambassador, and moreover, she gave me the sensation of ideal physical beauty, unlike anything I had ever experienced. Overwhelmed by her beauty, I had no time for base thoughts, and I simply admired her with the reverence one feels for a work of art. I've had many other unusual, strange, and sometimes disturbing experiences, but detailing them here is not the purpose of this letter, and it has already grown quite long, so let me hasten to the main point. Several months after my arrival at the hotel, a change occurred in my circumstances. The hotel owner decided to return to his home country for some reason and sold the hotel, as is, to a Japanese company. The Japanese company, aiming for a more profitable business model, decided to revamp the hotel's luxurious operating policy and cater to a wider clientele. They entrusted a large furniture dealer with the task of auctioning off the unnecessary furnishings, and my chair was included in the auction catalogue. When I learned of this, I was initially disappointed. I even considered using this opportunity to return to the outside world and start a new life. By that time, the money I had stolen had accumulated to a considerable sum, so even if I went back into society, I wouldn't have to live as miserably as before. But then I realized that while leaving the foreign hotel meant a great disappointment on the one hand, it also held a new hope on the other. Despite having loved so many different women over the past few months, the fact that they were all foreigners left me with a strange sense of unfulfillment, no matter how beautiful their bodies were. Perhaps, I thought, Japanese people can only truly fall in love with other Japanese people. I had gradually come to think this way. And then, my chair was put up for auction. This time, it might be bought by a Japanese person. And it might be placed in a Japanese home. That was my new hope. I decided to continue living in the chair a little longer. I spent a few agonizing days on display in the furniture store, but thankfully, my chair quickly found a buyer at the auction. Perhaps it was because, despite its age, it was still an impressive piece of furniture. The buyer was a government official who lived in a large city not far from Y. The journey from the furniture store to his residence, several miles long, was excruciating, as I was transported in a violently shaking truck. But that was nothing compared to the joy of knowing that the buyer, as I had hoped, was Japanese. The official owned a rather grand house, and my chair was placed in the spacious Western-style study. To my great satisfaction, the study was used more by his young and beautiful wife than by himself. For about a month since then, I have been constantly with the lady of the house. Except for her mealtimes and sleeping hours, her supple body has always been on top of me. This was because she had been working diligently on a writing project in the study. How much I loved her, I need not say. She was the first Japanese person I had ever been close to, and she possessed a truly beautiful body. It was with her that I experienced true love for the first time. Compared to her, my numerous experiences at the hotel were not love at all. The proof of this is that, never having felt this way before, I was not content with merely enjoying secret caresses. I desperately tried to make my presence known to her. I wanted her to be aware of me inside the chair, if possible. And, audacious as it may sound, I wanted her to love me. But how could I signal her? If I revealed outright that a man was hidden inside, she would surely be so startled that she would tell her husband or the servants. Then everything would be ruined, and I would be charged with a terrible crime and possibly even face legal punishment. So, I tried to make her feel as comfortable as possible in my chair, hoping she would become attached to it. As an artist, she must have possessed exceptionally keen senses. If she could sense life in my chair, if she could cherish it not just as an object but as a living being, that alone would be enough to satisfy me. Whenever she threw herself onto me, I tried to receive her as gently as possible. When she seemed tired, I would subtly shift my knees to change her position. And when she started to doze off, I would very, very gently rock my knees, serving as a cradle. Perhaps my efforts were rewarded, or perhaps it was simply my wishful thinking, but lately, she seems to have grown fond of my chair. She sinks into it with the sweet tenderness of a baby nestled in its mother's arms, or a maiden yielding to her lover's embrace. Even the way she moves her body on my lap seems somehow affectionate, and so my passion grew more intense each day. And finally, oh, madam, finally, I came to harbor a presumptuous desire, unbefitting my station. I thought that if I could just see my beloved's face, exchange a few words with her, I would gladly die, madam. You have surely guessed by now. The woman I love, please forgive my extreme impertinence, is none other than you. Ever since your husband purchased my chair at the furniture store in Y, I have been the pathetic man hopelessly in love with you, madam. I beg you, grant me this one request. Would you consent to meet me just once? And would you offer a word of comfort to this pathetic, ugly man? I ask for nothing more. I am far too ugly, too defiled, to ask for anything more. Please, please, grant the earnest wish of this most unfortunate man. I left your residence last night to write this letter. It would be too dangerous, and frankly impossible for me, to make such a request in person. And now, as you read this letter, I am anxiously pacing around your house, my face pale with worry. If you are willing to grant my impertinent request, please hang your handkerchief on the potted dianthus by the study window. I will take that as a sign and visit your front door, disguised as an ordinary caller. And the strange letter concluded with a fervent prayer. Yoshiko had turned pale halfway through the letter, overcome by a terrible premonition. She stood up involuntarily and fled from the eerie armchair in the Western-style study to the Japanese-style living room. She considered tearing up the rest of the letter without reading it, but her anxiety compelled her to finish it at the small table in the living room. Her premonition had been correct. What a horrifying truth. A stranger had been inside the armchair she sat in every day. Oh, how disgusting. A chill ran down her spine, as if she had been doused with ice water. She couldn't stop trembling. She was so stunned that she had no idea what to do. Should she examine the chair? No, she couldn't bring herself to do such a repulsive thing. Even if the man was gone, his belongings, his food and other filth, must still be inside. Madam, a letter for you. Startled, she turned to see a maid holding a freshly delivered envelope. Yoshiko took it automatically and was about to open it when she glanced at the address and gasped, dropping the letter in shock. It was written in the same distinctive hand as the previous eerie letter. She hesitated for a long moment, unsure whether to open it. Finally, she tore it open and, trembling, read the contents. It was a short letter, but the words within startled her once more. Please forgive my impertinence in writing to you out of the blue. I am a devoted reader of your work. I have sent you my humble manuscript under separate cover. I would be most grateful if you would be kind enough to read it and offer your critique. For certain reasons, I mailed the manuscript before writing this letter, so I presume you have already seen it. What did you think? If my humble work has made any impression on you, I would be overjoyed. I intentionally omitted it from the manuscript, but I intend to title it The Human Chair. I apologize for my boldness. Sincerely.